A doctor's strike continues to cripple Kenya's healthcare system, even as the government threatens to sack the striking doctors. Thousands of refugees remain stranded in Europe, prompting the European Union to issue a warning against member states who refuse to participate in the bloc's refugee relocation plan. And in our medical report, we'll talk to an expert on what needs to be done to fight multi-drug resistant tuberculosis in Africa. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent McCory. This is Africa 54. Tonight we begin in war-ravaged South Sudan, where the government will now charge up to $10,000 for foreign work permits. That's a 100-fold hike. Now, the move comes despite the country suffering from famine and in need of foreign aid. Since last week, aid agencies have been making airdrops of food in parts of South Sudan experiencing famine. Now, nearly half of South Sudan's population of about 5.5 million people are expected to lack a reliable source of food by July. That's according to the United Nations. The World Food Programme says about 14,000 people in the area have received food assistance, but that's only expected to last for about 1 month. The aid agency started carrying out the food drops as part of an interagency response mission in the Leer town in South Sudan's unity, but they have been carrying out airdrops since 2014.
WFP is delivering now 259 metric ton, which is a full ration for 1 month of the three major commodities, that is cereal, pulses, and vegetable oil. Plus the CSP++, which is distributed to the children aged 6 to 59 months for combating malnutrition.
Well, now South Sudan has been hit by the same East African drought that has pushed Somalia back to the brink of famine 6 years after 260,000 people starved to death in 2011. While Kenya's state doctors are refusing to return to work despite being ordered to do so by the government on Tuesday, the doctors walk out in December demanding that the government implement a deal agreed to in 2013 that would give them a 150 to 180% pay raise. After months of negotiations, the two sides have been unable to reach a deal. The government terminated the most recent talks after accusing the union of being inflexible during negotiations and rejecting a 50% pay hike. The doctors' union says its members may only return to duty after signing an agreement with the government, as was guided by the Court of Appeal under the mediation of religious leaders. Now, for more on the doctors' strike, VOA's East Africa correspondent Jill Craig joins me by phone from Nairobi. Jill, let's begin right there. There is a deal on the table that was agreed on by all the two sides and religious leaders. What is contained in that particular deal?
Yes, hi, Vincent. Nice to be with you this evening. Thank you. So as you mentioned, the religious leaders were acting as mediators in this particular version of the doctor's strike. And so they had presented their report to the court on Tuesday morning. And the union said that it did agree to this revised collective bargaining agreement. In that agreement, part of the deal was that they would get a signed recognition agreement, a signed CBA, and also a draft of a return to work statement. Now, what the union says is that by the evening, the government had actually decided not to go forward with that, and they said basically that they had withdrawn their offer to pay arrears to the doctors from last June until this January, and also that President Kenyatta, as you mentioned, said that our patience has run out with you, the doctors. Now, when you talk to the union leaders, they have a much different take on that. The union leaders are saying that they were willing to go back to work with the president's offer on the table. However, they demanded a signed collective bargaining agreement, which is, of course, the bone of contention from 2013. So that is what currently is now on the line here in Kenya.
So the issue here is not that the doctors have refused this new deal, which actually gives them way less than what they had asked for, but it's that the government has refused to put its signature on that commitment, right?
Correct, yes. And the government has, in previous iterations of this strike, they've also made other comments such as the fact that they don't have enough money to pay for all the doctors' demands. They've said that several times. They've also, if you understand the climate of Kenya right now, we also have our university lecturers on strike. And people have staged protests in the past however many months there was a health ministry scandal in the neighborhood of about $50 million US. So people, I would say, on all sides of this debate are frustrated, and the doctors will be going back to court on Monday with the government to see if anything could happen next week.
There have been threats of them being fired. Is anybody taking those seriously?
Well, it's interesting. The doctors have stayed pretty firm on this. You know, they said that they are not. Well, one of the union members said that they're not poor, but they're poorly paid. And so they've actually started their own little fund to help other doctors who might be in need. It's an interest-free type of loan program where if a doctor needs a bit of a loan, they can have it and then reimburse the fund and his or her fellow doctors later. So essentially the doctors have said they're not afraid of being fired. They have skills and knowledge and that the government can't take that away from them and that they're willing to walk if necessary. And, you know, a few weeks ago, we even saw the doctors go to jail. And again, they said they were very, strong in that particular move, and they said we're happy to go to jail and we'll do it again. So I think that's a little bit of an interesting dynamic to understand when you look at what's happening in Kenya right now.
Well, Jill, thank you very much. That's VOA's.
Thanks, Vincent.
Yes, thank you. That's VOA's East Africa correspondent, Jill Craig. Now, the European Union is warning it could start taking action against member states if they continue to refuse to participate in the bloc's refugee relocation plan. As Henry Ridgwell reports, only 2 countries, Finland and Malta, have met their obligations under the program, while tens of thousands of refugees remain stranded in southern European states.
The European Union approved a plan to relocate refugees stranded in Italy and Greece across the bloc in 2015. But the latest figures show member countries have accepted just 8% of the 160,000 refugees they promised to resettle. Brussels has warned it will accept no more excuses.
Our union is based on 2 principles: solidarity and responsibility. These words are not solely moral values. They are legal, binding principles enshrined in the treaties.
Hungary is among the countries that have refused to take any resettled refugees.
If you damage the fence, cross illegally, or attempt to cross, is counted to be a crime in Hungary.
It has begun reinforcing its border fence with Serbia, part of a crackdown on migration. Human rights groups accuse Hungary of criminalizing legitimate refugees and physically abusing migrants, a charge the government denies. The EU could take Hungary to the European Court of Justice to attempt to force compliance. But Brussels has other options, says research fellow Camino Mortera Martinez, who spoke to VOA via Skype.
So instead of going directly after a country which is not complying with EU law, you can try to use some other tools to force them into complying, for example, by withdrawing some of the budgets.
But that could backfire at a time when populist opposition to the EU is high.
To me, the political consequence of forcing countries at the moment to take in refugees is very clear. It's a very clear surge on anti-EU sentiment.
Faced with that dilemma, Europe is desperate to halt the flow of migrants. Germany is among the European states speeding up the deportation of failed asylum seekers. Analysts say German leader Angela Merkel is taking a tougher line before elections scheduled for September.
Because migration, even before the euro issue, is the most important problem we have in Europe right now. An obstacle to further integration and a danger for the internal security situation in Europe.
The EU estimates there are between 700,000 and 1 million migrants waiting in Libya. Calmer seas in recent days saw a surge in numbers trying to cross the Mediterranean, with nearly 1,000 rescued by the Italian Coast Guard last Thursday. Henry Ridgwell for VOA News, London.
Well, Hawaii has become the first U.S. state to file a lawsuit against President Donald Trump's revised executive order banning travel from 6 Muslim-majority countries: Iran, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, Syria, and Yemen. Attorneys for the Pacific Island state filed a lawsuit late Wednesday in a federal court in Honolulu, arguing the new order will harm the state's Muslim population, tourism, and foreign students. Hawaii's district attorney argues the travel ban discriminates against people based on their nation of origin or based on their religion. Now, many women and some men participated in rallies in cities across the United States Wednesday in what's been called a day without a woman. Some businesses allowed their employees to participate in the so-called strike to show support for women. The motivations behind why some people participated are different. VOA's Elizabeth Lee explains.
What do we want? Freedom! What do we want?
From Washington, D.C. to Los Angeles, thousands of people gathered and marched to show their support for women's rights.
We're putting an important message out there that women matter. We're more than half the population. We can make a difference in this world. I think we stand more for things we believe in, the love, the beauty, the hope, the uplifted side of humanity, and we want to share that with others.
The symbol of women's solidarity? Red. But it's not just women participating in these rallies. Fighting for women's rights is personal for Carlos Heredia from Los Angeles.
Growing up, seeing my mom abused by my father, then seeing my three sisters abused by their men, and the consistency of hearing what goes on, what they call gym talk or corporate talk, I think me being a male, I need to do my job to protect our women.
For many women, this event was also a political protest against President Donald Trump, as several thousand rallied in front of the White House.
What this president, unfortunately, is trying to do, he and his ridiculous cabinet, is bring this country backwards. We thought we had fought and made progress many, many years ago. Unfortunately, I think we got complacent and we stopped fighting, and we have to keep fighting.
Some people took the day off to make their voices heard. Others are retired or work for a company that supports the message of this day. Among them is the Paradigm Talent Agency, where the women there are doing more than just rallying for women's rights. They are also helping homeless women who are transitioning into permanent housing.
Sorry, we have 101 women in the Los Angeles office, so we decided to put together 101 hygiene bags today. And I think that's actually a nice symbol, because I think as 101, it represents us as a group and united, and the one represents us as individuals. We need to show up for things like today, and we need to show up to be part of the sisterhood.
Many participants of A Day Without a Woman say they are the lucky ones.
That I know a lot of people can't actually be here because they've got jobs that they have to be at. So when you're in a position where you can and you've got people saying like go, it's important for us to be here and represent for those who can't, and it's incredibly important.
Surrounded by a sea of red, these women say they feel empowered to continue the fight for women's rights of all kinds within their own communities. Elizabeth Lee, VOA News.
Well, I want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we covered during the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our show live on Facebook, so check us out and share our show with your friends. Also, check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. And you can find me on Twitter at VOA Vince McCory. Now, coming up, a health expert tells us what Africa needs to do to fight multi-drug resistant tuberculosis. Stay with us.
Like Voice of America on Facebook. Follow VOA on Twitter. Join VOA on our YouTube channel. Like, follow, join VOA.
Well, it's time for Health Report. Joining us now is Africa 54 Health correspondent Lino Madu with some new information on the treatment of tuberculosis. Lino.
Significant progress is being made in South African prisons in reducing tuberculosis and HIV/AIDS. Inmates and people who work at the Department of Correctional Services are at high risk of contracting TB, which in turn can filter back into their communities. To address this serious issue, a large national TB program has been established, and TB screening of inmates has increased to more than 90% on admission, with almost 180,000 screened since the program began in 2014. The finding was revealed at a 5-day TB and HIV/AIDS meeting, which is underway in South Africa. Now, researchers have discovered a compound found in soil bacteria that could lead to new drugs to combat tuberculosis. The compound, sansamicin uridyl peptide, is produced by soil bacteria and stops other bacteria growing around them. The scientists produced synthetic versions of the natural compound and showed that they can kill the tuberculosis bacterium in the laboratory. The study was published in the journal Nature Communications and conducted by scientists from Australia, the United Kingdom, the US, and Canada. The scientists say their findings offer a starting point for developing a new TB drug, and that further tests and safety studies are already being planned. Medical experts say the TB bacterium is becoming increasingly resistant to treatment, leading to multi-drug resistant MDR-TB and extensively drug-resistant TB, XDR-TB. In today's Ask the Expert segment, we spoke with Dr. Mario Raviglione, Director of the Global Tuberculosis Program at the World Health Organization, and asked him what can be done to fight multi-drug-resistant TB in Africa.
The MDR-TB crisis is not solved, and in fact it remains at crisis level, and it really needs to be addressed forcefully, otherwise it's just going to expand, and this is not good for the control of tuberculosis in general and for the people who suffer out of this disease. African countries more or less produce, so to speak, 25% of TB cases in the world, but with the highest rates per capita. So it's an epidemic there that is very serious because it's often associated with HIV. So it's something that has to be faced very, very strongly over there, like it has been the case for the HIV epidemic. They created, national AIDS commissions that were reporting to the head of state. We would like to see this kind of commitment, this kind of push from also the same, ministers and governments for tuberculosis. South Africa, for instance, is a good model. In the case of the Minister of Health of South Africa, they really did a great job in, for instance, covering the entire country with expert, which is our recommended diagnostic, and they are now making available new drugs. The other example I like to cite is always Ethiopia, because they have a primary care system there that is based on the health extension workers that I find exceptional, and that's where people go when they have cough. They go to these health extension workers in the villages, and they can be then sent to the appropriate level where the diagnosis is made. At the moment it is going down at 1.5% per year, which means it will take 250 years to get to that level unless we accelerate. So what we have now proposed to all the ministers of health is a different model that will push the incidence down at 10% per year in 2025, but that means basically essentially doing everything that we have available today, including prophylaxis among people, for instance, with HIV or the minors in Southern Africa and so on. If we're able to do that, we could push it down to 10% per year in 2025. However, after that, we will need new tools. That's why there is always our appeal to African countries participate in research efforts, because we really need every possible strength that you have in contributing to that. With new tools, new diagnostics, new drugs, and potentially a new vaccine in one day, then we would be able to reach these targets in 2030 and 2035.
That was Dr. Mario Raviglione speaking with us about fighting multi-drug-resistant TB in Africa. Now, the World Health Organization has issued an urgent call for scientists to develop new drugs and for governments to fund the research. Unless new antibiotics are developed quickly, people will once again die from common infections. Here is VOA's Carol Pearson.
The world is entering a time when common infections caused by bacteria will be deadly.
and doctors are alarmed.
You all of a sudden understand what it was like to practice medicine maybe 50, 70, 80 years ago when there weren't antibiotics.
New antibiotics are urgently needed against bacteria that pose the greatest threat to human health, those most at risk, residents of nursing homes, hospital patients, and children. Children may have weaker immune systems than adults, and they receive smaller doses of antibiotics than adults do.
For the longest time, we've had a number of different antibiotics in the pipeline at any given time. And so whenever we ran out of the ability to use one, we would move to the next one.
But that's no longer possible. In 2010, the U.S. began work to develop new antibiotics.
There are antibiotics in the pipeline, but the numbers are insufficient. They're insufficient to deal with the increasing rates of antibiotic-resistant bacteria.
And they're insufficient to deal with the normal mutations. Bacteria are constantly changing to find new ways to resist the drugs that kill them. Once they develop that ability, they can pass it on so other bacteria can become drug-resistant as well.
We are seeing greater than 2 million episodes of antibiotic-resistant infections in people each year in the U.S. alone, and 23,000 of these episodes result in death.
The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has asked hospitals and doctors to be careful not to overuse antibiotics. But beyond overuse, there are other reasons these drugs are being rendered powerless.
Antibiotic resistance is not only being generated by using too many antibiotics, but also by spread of infection from lack of hygiene, from unintended contact with soiled surfaces, things of that sort. So the infection control side is equally important.
Patients can also help. On its website, the CDC says take antibiotics as prescribed and finish the prescription, even if you feel better. Still, urgent action on a global level is needed to prevent the catastrophe that a post-antibiotic era would cause. Carol Pearson, VOA News, Washington.
That's our health report for today. To stay in touch, or if you have a medical question that you would like to have answered, tweet me at Linor Moudou, and we'll have a medical expert respond to your query. Back to you, Vincent.
Well, thanks a lot, Linor. Now be sure to watch Linor Moudou's health reports every Tuesday and Thursday right here on Africa 54. Well, in business news, Nigeria has laid out a comprehensive outline of Abuja's medium-term economic policy agenda. For the details, let's go to Africa 54 business correspondent Jill Malandrino reporting from the NASDAQ market in New York. Jill?
Yesterday, Nigeria's Ministry of Budget and National Planning presented the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan. Aside from broad objectives previously outlined in budget documents and the medium-term expenditure framework, the ERGP represents the first comprehensive outline of Abuja's medium-term policy agenda. The broad objectives of the plans are to restore growth, invest in people, and to build a globally competitive economy. To achieve these objectives, Abuja has identified 5 key areas for execution strategies, including macroeconomic stability, agriculture and food security, energy sufficiency, transportation infrastructure, and industrialization focused on small and medium enterprises. Much like previous strategy documents, the ERGP correctly identifies most of the issues plaguing the economy. Some particularly encouraging shifts in the policy agenda under the ERGP, however, relate to a greater emphasis on private sector involvement. The acknowledgement that the current monetary policy framework is acting as a drag on the economy and the urgent need to improve infrastructure, the downstream petroleum industry, and electricity generation. The key is, however, the current government's ability to effectively implement policy given its poor track record to date, while the central bank's policies have not fared much better over the past 2 years. From the NASDAQ market site, I'm Jill Malandrino for Africa 54 Business News.
Well, it's time now for a short break. Still to come on Africa 54, young women in Cameroon turn garbage into something much more useful. We'll be right back.
our kids.
Welcome back. Now, it's hard to teach young women about getting ahead through technology when they don't even have enough light to study. That was the problem facing the Green Girls project in Cameroon. So project leaders took a break from their lessons and focused on solving that problem. The result is enlightening. VOA's Kevin Enochs reports.
It's a dirty business, but the result is illuminating, literally. The Green Girls Project in Cameroon teaches young women to use technology to get ahead. But project leaders discovered that they had a bigger challenge on their hands.
One of the girls approaches me and asks me, "Madam, we don't have light, so how do we use these books and all these things, educational tools you're giving us?"
It turns out the solution was right under their noses. The project partnered with a local energy company to install equipment that converts human and animal waste into an energy source. It's ground together, then poured into a biodigester to produce biogas.
I think instead of us going to buy gas outside, we can use biogas because it will be much cheaper. And with biogas that we use, that we create ourselves, we can get like sewages or wages from, like, we can get like pawpaw peelings, banana peelings, and make our gases. And due to that, we'll be able to produce our energy, like to cook and to have light or electricity in our homes.
The gas can give light and power to small appliances in a country where only about 50% of the people have regular access to electricity. The project is also teaching the women about other forms of renewable energy, like solar panels. So far, the project has put biogas into 3,000 households, and the demand is rising. Kevin Enochs, VOA News, Washington.
Well, and that's our show for today. Now be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com for more news. Tune in to VOA's evening radio show, Africa News Tonight at 1800 UTC. And in the mornings today, break Africa between 0300 and 0600 UTC, Monday through Friday. Thanks a lot for watching from all of us here in Washington. Have a good night.
Welcome to English in a Minute. When something loses its original shape or form, it does not look very natural or comfortable.
Bent out of shape.
Hey, did you tell Greg about my dinner party?
Yeah, I did. I thought he was invited.
Well, now he's all bent out of shape because I didn't invite him.
I'm sorry.